What if I told you that the entire magnificent Egyptian civilization, with its pyramids and pharaohs, was built on the whim of a single river? It sounds crazy, right? But without the Nile, there would be no pyramids, no Tutankhamun, no Cleopatra. The story of ancient Egypt is, in essence, the story of the Nile River. Today, we are going to journey back in time and uncover how this incredible waterway wasn't just a part of Egypt's story, it wrote the whole script. To truly understand Egypt, you have to understand the land it sits on. Much of Egypt is a vast, unforgiving desert. The ancient Greeks even called it the gift of the Nile for a reason. Outside of the narrow green strip along the riverbanks, life is nearly impossible. So, how did one of the world's greatest civilizations spring up in the middle of such a harsh environment? The secret lies in a yearly event that was as predictable as the sunrise, the annual flood. Every year, from around June to September, heavy summer rains far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands would swell the Nile's tributaries. This surge of water would travel downstream, causing the Nile in Egypt to overflow its banks. Now, this wasn't a destructive, catastrophic flood. It was a gentle, life-giving inundation. As the flood waters spread across the valley, they deposited a thick layer of rich, black silt. This silt was a natural superfertilizer, packed with all the nutrients needed to grow crops. When the flood waters receded around October, they left behind this incredibly fertile soil. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, which literally means the black land, named after this stark, precious earth. In contrast, the surrounding desert was Deshret, the red land. This annual gift of fertile soil meant that Egyptian farmers could reliably grow massive surpluses of food, mainly wheat and barley. This abundance of food was the absolute bedrock of their civilization. It meant not everyone had to be a farmer. People could become specialized workers, priests, scribes, soldiers, artisans, and, of course, the engineers and laborers who would go on to build the temples and pyramids. This reliable cycle of flood, plant, and harvest shaped the entire Egyptian worldview. Their calendar was based on it, divided into 3 seasons: Agat, the inundation; Prit, the growing season; and Shamu, the harvest season. Their gods were tied to it. Happy was the god of the annual flood, a joyful, benevolent deity often depicted with a bulging belly, symbolizing abundance. Osiris, one of their most important gods, was associated with death, resurrection, and the fertile power of the Nile. The river's cycle of renewal mirrored their beliefs about the afterlife. But the Nile was more than just a giant farm. It was the nation's superhighway. Remember, there were no paved roads, no trucks, no trains. The easiest and most efficient way to move anything heavy was by boat. The Nile flows from south to north, so you could simply float your boat downstream. But what about going upstream, against the current? The prevailing winds in Egypt blow from north to south. So, to go south, you just had to put up a sail. It was a perfect natural transportation system. This effortless travel was crucial for unifying Egypt. A single ruler, the pharaoh, could control a vast territory stretching for hundreds of miles. He could send armies, tax collectors, and administrators up and down the river with ease. It allowed for the creation of one of the world's first nation-states. More spectacularly, it's how they built the pyramids. The massive limestone and granite blocks used to construct these wonders were quarried, sometimes hundreds of miles away, and then loaded onto barges and floated down the Nile to the construction sites at Giza and elsewhere. Without the Nile as a heavy lifting conveyor belt, building the pyramids would have been practically impossible. The river also provided everything else the Egyptians needed to live. The papyrus reeds growing along the banks were turned into one of the world's first forms of paper, which allowed them to record their history, laws, and literature. The muddy banks provided clay for pottery and bricks to build their homes. The river teemed with fish, a vital source of protein, and attracted birds for hunting. It was a one-stop shop for survival and prosperity. Of course, living by the river wasn't without its challenges. A low flood meant less fertile land and the threat of famine. A flood that was too high could be destructive, washing away villages. This unpredictability pushed the Egyptians to become incredible innovators. They developed sophisticated systems of irrigation, with canals and dikes to manage the flood waters and direct them to where they were needed most. They became keen astronomers, tracking the stars to predict the flood's arrival more accurately. The need to remeasure fields after each flood is believed to have been the driving force behind the development of geometry and mathematics. The challenges of the Nile made them smarter and more organized. So when you look at a picture of the pyramids standing tall against the desert sand, remember what you can't see. Remember the river that made it all possible. The Nile was the lifeblood, the highway, the clock, and the spiritual heart of ancient Egypt. It was a force of nature so powerful and so benevolent that it allowed a civilization to not just survive, but to flourish and create wonders that still mesmerize us thousands of years later. The story of Egypt is a powerful reminder of how human ingenuity, when combined with the gifts of the natural world, can create something truly timeless. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey down the Nile as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like to explore. See you in the next video.